Inland rail, I just wanted to have a bit of follow-up about that.
Certainly.
And in particular
I'll get Mr Wood back to the
Yes.
table.
And as we know, there's inland rail being a mix of existing rail and new pieces of rail, and the particular piece that I'm interested in is the Melbourne to Albury section to be used for inland rail. And following up on the questions I was asking of the ARTC, in terms of planning for inland rail, do you expect there will need to be significant extra expenditure to bring the track up to standard to cope with the extra amount of freight that would use that stretch of rail?
Senator, that's currently not anticipated, but as Mr Fullerton indicated earlier this morning, remains under review. But currently it's not anticipated because the track is at a standard required to meet the freight operation.
But do you, given the experience that we've just had of, we've had a wet winter and the doesn't really seem to be, according to the locals who use this, railway line every day, every week, that the ballast rehabilitation program has delivered what it was required to deliver. We've, got the quite extensive speed restrictions in place. Are you re-looking at that? Because it seems to me, in terms of planning for it, they're potentially, given the extra, what's going to be required, the extra impact on the rail, that there would be a need to do significant further work.
Well, that's not the advice we have at this time, Senator.
Right. And so have you, what sort of assessment have you done? Have you just taken the ARTC's word for it that the work that's been done is sufficient? Because, we're looking at double stack containers, we're looking at significantly increased freight movements along that stretch of line in a stretch of line that's currently, from a range of perspectives, doesn't seem to be up to scratch at the moment.
Well, I think, Senator, it's meeting the lease obligations. It's meeting the requirements of operators at the moment. As Mr Fullerton indicated this morning, freight operators are actually moving to rail, which would indicate that it is meeting their requirements. So, for example, the new SCT services, a new entrant on the East Coast, effectively operating in its own right, making significant investment on the East Coast, including a new terminal outside of Brisbane, which is based on the traffic both from Melbourne and from the Albury region using the existing track.
But I think it's fair to say, Senator, if I can add, I think, as you got a sense of from Mr Fullerton this morning, the reality is that there is concern about the condition of the track, Albury to Melbourne, and I think the future proofing, as he discussed this morning, some work required for double stacking and the like, which is still under design and review by the ARTC. So I think, coming back to your question, I think most people recognise that there will be further work required on the Albury-Melbourne line and really that existing standard gauge line, which was inherited, if I can put it that way, by the ARTC in a very poor condition when the Commonwealth took the leases. It will be under review, and certainly the future design stage, if we're going to meet the loads and particularly to provide the productivity efficiency we see out of inland rail, then we will need to come back and have a look at that condition of that existing.
Okay, so you are expecting to do that future assessment as part of
I think it will, and certainly the ARTC, and as Mr Fullerton indicated this morning, the ARTC, as it looks at its forward investment strategy, I think will come back and have another look at that standard gauge line.
Okay, and what would we be looking at? I understand that the ballast rehabilitation program, what was the cost of that when they undertook it?
I think Mr Fullerton was indicating $134 million, which was not just for that section, but I think, was it just Victoria?
No, it also extended into New South Wales up to around Junee or Goulburn.
But essentially the previous position had been, there are certainly, in an optimal situation, you'd go back and effectively rework a number of the track subgrade, which is in poor condition.
Which is what the community was saying needed to occur
and
when they did
and which the ARTC has done in certain sections, I think, which has lifted the position of the condition of the track. But certainly, I think that in the future, they will need to go back and have a look at more of that type of work, basically rebuilding the subgrade in some sections.
Right, but those costs at the moment aren't considered, they're not included in the projected costs of Inland
They're
Rail.
not within the Inland Rail project. They would form part of the ARTC's ongoing capital investment program as needed.
Right, and so presumably, given the ballast rehabilitation program was 130 million, you'd be looking at, considerably upwards of that to do the track rebuild.
If there had to be a rebuild of particularly some of the subgrade material under the track, then that would be quite a considerable cost.
Yes, so considerably more than that $130 million over a period of time, obviously. But
Depending on the locations, yes, it could be quite a considerable task.
would you be able to sort of put an estimate on? Are we looking at $500 million, a billion?
I couldn't give you an estimate, Senator. It would very much be based on locations and the extent of work required.
Right.